Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Gray Matter. Well, words like fascist and Nazi are thrown about so liberally these days, pardon the pun, that it seems to me that most of the people who use these words don't really understand what they mean, at least not in their proper historical and ideological context. So I thought what we should do today is have someone on the program who knows about such things and also has written a very fascinating book about someone who is a sort of forgotten Nazi. In fact, a Nazi that some people who are very interested in Nazis, have read a lot about World War II, has never heard of, like me. So on the show today is American legal scholar Dean Reuter, who's written a book called The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil. Welcome to the program today, Dean. It's great to have you on Gray Matter as our special guest today.
It's very good to be with you, Leighton. And I got to tell you, I love the name of your program. It makes me feel like I'm an intellectual even before I've opened my mouth.
Well, I've read your book, so and I think you have some. You definitely have made your bones. I don't want to, I put the label of intellectual on you. I called you a scholar instead. But before we introduce our guest properly, as we always do, we're going to go to our framing aphorisms. So these are going to have a very distinctive Nazi flavor today. You'll appreciate why. One is from somebody who is not a Nazi, but somebody who's sadly the anniversary of his assassination is coming up soon on April the 4th. Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "Never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal." Secondly, from Joseph Goebbels, the mastermind of propaganda for the Nazi Party, maybe the smartest Nazi, if you will. He said, "If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it." And next, Heinrich Himmler, the very famous head of the SS, second in command to Hitler by the end of the war, who said, "Germans who wish to use firearms should join the SS or the SA. Ordinary citizens don't need guns, as their having guns doesn't serve the state." And finally, from another famous Nazi that a lot of people still don't seem to know that he was a Nazi. This is Wernher von Braun, the genius physicist and rocketeer who said, "Once the rockets are up, who cares where they come down? That's not my department." Well, who do we have on the show today? Well, as I said, Dean Reuter, distinguished American legal scholar, author of this book, The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil. We're going to be talking about. Dean is general counsel of the Federal Society for Law and Public Policy and a fellow at the National Security Institute at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School. He was the editor of Liberty's Nemesis, The Unchecked Expansion of the State and Confronting Terror, 9/11, The Future of American National Security, which is a very interesting book that we're also going to be adding to our reading list. So, Dean, where I think I'd like to start is looking at your background. You don't present as somebody who's a sort of a Nazi scholar. You present more as somebody who's a legal scholar. Of course, there's a legal aspect to this that is highlighted in your book. But what was it that drew you to this particular subject matter of this book?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great place to start. First, thank you for having me on. I really enjoy being with you today. I was attracted to this. I am I don't know, something of a historian, I would say. Amateur historian, always interested in history, reading a lot about history. I've always been fascinated by different eras of history, particularly fascinated by World War II and the Holocaust. And my name, Reuter, is very German. My ancestry, very German. But both sides of my family came to the United States from Germany in the 1860s. So we're thoroughly Americanized. I happen to have been born in Germany, in Heidelberg, but I was born there because my father was a U.S. Army officer and he was stationed there. So my family was living there when I was born. But all my ancestors are from Germany. And as I began to grow up, I became fascinated with what could make one of the most advanced societies in the history of mankind, in the history of the world, run so completely, thoroughly off the rails in a way that it's almost indescribably bad. It's almost so bad it's hard to comprehend. and really get your mind around it. And while I had that fascination, which is a little bit morbid in and of itself, part of it I began to realize is some sense of collective guilt almost. The people that perpetrated the Holocaust, the same DNA, probably cousins of mine, distant cousins. I don't blame myself for it, but there's this that added a layer of complexity to my thinking about how that society just went off the rails. Now, in a more concrete way, the way I became involved in this hunt for this German general, Nazi general, who you correctly identify as somebody nobody's heard of. I had a friend from college who knew me to be involved in a couple book projects already at that time, who knew me to be interested in World War II, who was researching this German general. He stumbled upon another gentleman in Ireland researching the same general. So Keith Chester, who's on the cover of the book, had met Dr. Colin Lowry, and they came to me as a lawyer to write a collaboration agreement between the two of them so they could share their research findings without stabbing each other in the back, so to speak. And I wrote up an agreement, and they started telling me about this general, and it's like I was beyond skeptical. Like I couldn't believe.
I can understand why.
Yeah, that they would have a story, and at the time they approached me, they didn't have every aspect of the story. We were years from uncovering everything we would finally learn. But even the idea that there was a General Hans Kammler who was so powerful, so evil, and yet his story had never been told, I thought that in and of itself was remarkable.
It certainly is.
Even to the point of being unbelievable.
Yeah.
So I came to it sort of by happenstance, but by invitation.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating story. Both what's interesting about the book, and we'll dive into a bit more. You give a sort of nice little dip of the beak into it. What's fascinating about it is it's not just an historical book, because it goes into what was going on in the history of the time, but also this really fascinating relationship between the sort of disintegration of post-war Germany and when the Americans come in, and how the Americans begin to become involved in, let's say, the writing or rewriting of the history of World War II, and how we get people like this General Kammler, who I'd never heard of. I mean, I read William Auscher's, compendium of, the rise and fall of the Third Reich. I mean, that anybody who's read that book knows it's a big book.
Yeah.
He is right there. And I don't remember any mention of Kammler in that book. But what's interesting about your book is it sort of brings some of the stuff that was going on in the Nazi period transitionally, but also brings it all the way up to date, because you have this other aspect in the book that's really important about how governments deal with sensitive information. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Sure. You're happy to talk about that. Yeah. Towards the end of the book, I start to ruminate about this deal that I think we've proven that this General Kammler made with the U.S. Army. And the fact that happened in 1945, and there are to this day documents that you can't get, that we couldn't get, even under the Freedom of Information Act, because the government won't disclose them. And there are many, many other documents you can get, but they're highly redacted, and you've seen those before, where there's these black lines that cover full paragraphs of text. There were two things in particular that that I talk about sometimes, because to me they're stunning. Everybody knows not everybody, but your viewers probably know World War II ended in 1945. That's when this general supposedly died.
Right.
We, in doing the research for this book, made a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, an official request for information from the U.S. Department of Justice. And in response to that, they said, we have a document, 1969, that's 35 pages long. We can't give it to you. We have a document, 1987, that's 87 pages long. We can't give it to you. Not even a redacted version, not even a whole bunch of blank pages, just saying this is it, but you can't see any of it. They just said, we can't give it to you at all.
Wow.
And when we were starting to write up the book, when I was writing the book, I said to the researcher, Keith, it's like, please renew that request and let's just see if what they say. And the response to the second request was, no such documents exist.
Oh.
Which, and these point out, make it very clear, the 1960s document was 25 years after the end of the war. That's when that document was created. The 1987 document, of course, was created 42 years after the end of the war. And we're asking for it another 30 years on, and it's still classified. And then on the second request, it doesn't exist.
Mm.
So, the way the government treats sensitive information, at a minimum, there is a bias towards classifying things. And then there's a bias equally strong to not declassify them.
Right,
And this is
right.
despite a lot of very direct instructions from the government to declassify whenever possible.
Right. That's sort of supposed to be the general theme, but let's sort of end the suspense and introduce people to sort of the star of this book, if we can call him that, this Hans Kammler, this general. And people are fascinated by, Nazi stories like Josef Mengele and, of course, Adolf Eichmann. It was the subject of Hannah Arendt's really incredible book. But here we have this Kammler guy. Who is General Hans Kammler, and why is he an important Nazi figure? So much so that you wrote a book about him.
Yeah. Well, he was born in 1901. So he's dead. He's dead now if he wasn't dead in 1945. And he grew up. This is important. He grew up in World War I, too young to serve, barely.
Right. Yeah.
So he was coming of age during World War I, and everybody remembers the stab in the back, the idea that Germany was all set to win the war. Everyone expected Germany to win World War I, and suddenly they surrender. They capitulate.
Mm-hmm.
And the German population felt betrayed by the German army and the German leaders. Like the rug had been pulled out from under them.
Mm-hmm.
Kammler was in that group. And then you have the Treaty of Versailles, which is the resolution of the war, the treaty that, by most people's account, and certainly by the average German's account, extracted extremely heavy penalties from the German nation and the German citizens as a consequence of their terrible behavior in World War I. So you feel betrayed by your country, you're living in a miserable economy, and everything is a hardship. Despite that, he manages to become an engineer and an architect. He gets his education, he goes to school, and in those inter-year wars, becomes a professional. And he's working on some sort of benign projects, police test tracks, communication systems, other railroads, all sorts of projects. And he becomes known pretty well for being efficient. And he's a student of standardized methods and standardized materials. So he begins to distinguish himself as quite adept at building things. And then the war breaks out, and he sort of maintains that stance. He's already by this time, and then even before Hitler becomes chancellor, Hans Kammler joins the Nazi Party.
Right.
And even before Hitler becomes the president of Germany, this is the early 1930s, Hans Kammler joins the SS. So he's not just an architect and an engineer. He's an ideologue. He's a believer. He wrote a treatise in 1933 that very much tracked Mein Kampf, that imagined, but in great detail, Germany's conquest of all the Eastern nations and the repopulation of those nations with ethnic Germans and the enslavement of those populations in the process.
Right.
So it was an early blueprint for World War II. But he gets into the early years of the war still as sort of a high efficient functionary. Joins the Luftwaffe. And now he's got what I would describe as the three golden credentials, because Hitler's very suspicious of his inner circle. He's suspicious of the Wehrmacht. But the people he trusts in order are Nazi Party members, within that group, the SS, and then people who were in the Luftwaffe, which was a third entity basically created by the Hitler regime. So Kammler, with these golden credentials and his reputation for efficiency, when it came time to implement the Holocaust, they tapped Kammler for that. And
Mm.
um, he before Lake Wannsee, if you remember that,
Yes,
that's
the Wannsee Conference, right?
the Wannsee
Hmm.
Conference in
About 1942,
January of 1942,
right?
recognized or thought by many scholars to be the moment where the Holocaust was formalized
Hmm.
and institutionalized. January 27th of 1941, so 4.5 months before Wannsee, we see the orders. We found the written orders from Hans Kammler identifying Auschwitz as the killing camp,
Yeah.
and appointing his own guy as the on-site architect, and then beginning to double and then redouble the size of Auschwitz.
How
So
how
that
did you uncover those records? I
with
was really
just
shocked by that when I read that in your book. That
it was some of it. I like to say it's dogged research, and if you look at the cover of the book, that I'm on the cover.
hmm.
Dr. Colin Lowry, who's the researcher in Ireland, is on the cover,
Yeah.
and Keith Chester is on the cover. They
Hmm.
basically had different continents. Keith was doing the research in the United States. Colin Lowry was doing the research all over Europe, and it's a
Mm.
combination. Like I've said before, that World War II was the largest undertaking in the history of human beings. And at the end of it, it's like they just threw everything into boxes and sent it back to archives. And it was never really sorted, never many documents aren't digitized. So it's almost a brute force effort to go find what you're looking for. There
Mm.
are some guides for some things, but it's not just going to the National Archives in the United States and at College Park. It's libraries, it's military bases, it's Wright-Patterson, it's Harvard collection, it's some general's house, and his papers end up at the University of Illinois. I mean, it is a mess. So
Mm.
some of it's luck, but some of it is just um,
You've
uh,
got to
just
dig.
resilience, and
Yeah.
just you just keep going. But it is both of them. And then I developed it. It's this familiarity with the names and the places, and knowing what you're looking at, and
Mm.
being able to see. It's like aha. It's like
Make
that's the
those
name I
connections.
recognize from over
Right.
there, and then
Right.
you begin to stitch together this narrative.
Hmm.
Um,
So when was the first time that you came across this name, Kammler? Because most people even people who are students of World War II, and I would consider myself one of those, would not recognize that name. So when did you first come across this name, Kammler, as
well,
somebody that you would research and who had such an important role in the Nazi Party?
yeah. Let me reassure you a little bit, Leighton, that I talked to dozens of World War II scholars during this research, and none of them had heard of Hans Kammler.
Wow.
It's mystifying, and there are reasons why, and I'll get to that in
Yeah.
a minute. But I
Hmm.
first heard the name when Keith Chester, my friend from college, called me to write that
Ah.
collaboration agreement, and he said, "There's this Nazi general Hans Kammler, and we know this about him, and we know this, and he was all powerful, and he was all evil. He was involved in the Holocaust. Nobody's ever written about him." And I'm thinking, that just can't be true. I've never heard of this guy. And I've heard of the guys you listed at the top of your program.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but when as in doing the research for this and seeing all the documents and really appreciating what he did, I believe, had he been known to have survived the war at the end of the war, he would have been number one on the wanted list for everyone.
Hmm.
He would have been more sought after than Eichmann or Mengele or Klaus Barbie.
Hmm.
And it's
Certainly.
because of
Yeah.
what he did. He not only identified Auschwitz as the killing camp, he and we have the architectural works for this. He designed the barracks,
Yeah.
and we have the architectural drawings for a barracks, and it's designed to put 550 people in it. And in the margin, he strikes through the number 550 and puts 774. So he's created a facility to house people where each person has about as much room as a coffin. That's the way he wedged people
Incredible.
in there. And then he
Yeah.
went on to design and implement and install the gas chambers and the crematorium.
Mm.
And we have one order after another where he's making the specifications, changing things, making repairs because there were issues, but also the diabolical genius of the guy at Auschwitz. The
Yeah.
the trains originally were coming in to the barracks, and they were close to um, the the barracks. And we said, no, we're going to put the gas chambers and the ovens right here. And the barracks can be over there. The people who are capable can make the 1 mile walk over to the barracks. It's the people who are infirm, the young, the elderly, the wounded, who would walk right to the gas chambers, and then their lives would end, and then an elevator up to the crematorium. It was a brutal regime that he organized. It was diabolically efficient, and he was in charge of it. And then what happened at Auschwitz was duplicated under his watchful eye at other camps, other killing camps.
Right. That was
Balzac and Medyanik.
That was a blueprint. Yeah.
That's right. And he was I'm going to make sure your viewers know he was a hands-on guy. His office was in Berlin, but he was at Auschwitz. He was at Medyanik. And then we see evidence where he had toured Eastern Germany following the advancing troops, and he studied the methods of death that were being utilized by the Einsatzgruppen. These were killing squads of SS officers, trailed the troops, rounded up local citizens, rounded up the Jews, and then began killing them. And they would use pistols, then they switched to rifles.
Very inefficient,
weapons. And then they invented this gas truck where they would put people into a truck.
I've seen that.
And that's what triggered the gas chambers back in the homeland and back in Poland and other places that the Nazis occupied.
One of the things that your book answers for me was almost kind of a mystery, because when you read, for example, Hannah Arendt's book about Eichmann, she talks about the banality of evil. And she talks about, a lot of these guys like Himmler and Eichmann and others that you mentioned, Hermann Goering, these people were not flaming geniuses. I don't think Adolf Hitler could ever be accused of having a soaring IQ. He wasn't Albert Einstein. And so there had to be people like Kammler who are actually engineering all of this and figuring it all out, because there is, whatever you could say about the Nazis and almost everything that they did, there was almost an overabundance of precision. They were sometimes too precise in the things that they did. And so your book actually answers a question for me, and that is, where were all the really smart people, who were designing all this stuff, things like Stuka dive bombers and, these tanks and, Pervitin, where were these people? And it turns out that a lot of the people who were the masterminds behind the menace that we saw of the Nazi period are these hidden people like Kammler, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I wasn't surprised to learn that Germany was such an advanced society and their culture was highly advanced, and they had the music and they had the scientists and they had all sorts of things. One of the things I learned that doesn't shock me in retrospect, but many people knew that Germany was going to lose the war a year in advance, 18 months in advance, 24 months in advance. And it became very clear to all the Allies. It's like Germany had not only advanced weapons and music and culture, but the nylon and synthetic rubbers and fracking and electronic switches that you could use for nuclear weapons and radar and sonar, all sorts of developments that nobody had. And the rockets, which we can get to.
The Enigma machine, which had, basically led to the language of modern computers,
That's right. I mean, that's right. And what became clear was that at the end of the war, and Germany's losing, there was going to be this mad scramble for the technology.
Yes.
And I was surprised to learn not that there was this mad scramble, and not that, the U.S., we wanted to get to it before Russia did. But we also wanted to get to it before England did and before France did, our friendly allies. So that was an interesting aspect of the book as well.
Yeah, and it really translates into modern times as well too, because in the same way that countries now are battling or fighting over the new technology and say data and AI, there was a real free for all for the type of technology that was available then that had been really advanced incredibly by World War II out of necessity. And so the kind of next thing I want to talk to you about in the book is, it's not only a really fascinating history of World War II and kind of this untold story of World War II, but the other part of it that's maybe even more troubling than that is your book kind of challenges this good guy versus bad guy story of World War II, because it turns out that the United States and other countries were actually involved in some dishonesty and some cover up. Do you want to talk about that? And that really has affected, it seems to me, you don't state this overtly in your book, but there's the suggestion that perhaps some of the secrecy that was rife in Nazi Germany maybe seeped into, let's say, the culture of the United States, at least in terms of government. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think when nations face existential threats, and that describes pretty well the human condition in World War II,
Yeah.
and really as we moved into the Cold War, people knew in the United States that the Soviet Union, Russia, was going to be an existential threat,
Right.
And intelligence, military style intelligence, really didn't exist so much in World War One. It became its development was accelerated during World War II for all sorts of reasons. But that, began to cover everything with a layer of secrecy. And then as the war closes out, what's interesting, that dynamic I mentioned about scrambling for technology, not only did we want it, we didn't want them to have it. We didn't want Russia to have it. So it's important that we not only get it, but then we don't disclose what we've gotten. And secrecy was an imperative. And you can see that manifest in a couple of ways. One of the most stark ways that probably most of your viewers don't even know about today was this Unit 731, which was a unit of the Japanese apparatus, the military apparatus, that was engaged in chemical and biological warfare. And they were doing experiments, sometimes laboratory experiments, but infamously on human populations in villages and in towns, where they would release these weapons and then study their effects. Really, really wicked
Incredible
stuff.
Wow.
And nobody knew about this in real time. We didn't know about it until after the war. As the war's closing, we find out about it. And there were these very interesting and troubling, but sometimes understandable communications that go back and forth among U.S. Government and military, and a decision made. It's like, we're not going to prosecute these people. We're not going to broadcast this. The information, that is, these non-scientific but still somewhat valuable findings, are too important to disclose. And we want to keep all the information to ourselves. If we disclose this, we're going to have to share it with France. We're going to have to share it with England. Maybe they'd be pressured to share it with the Soviet Union. But this, instead of prosecuting, we take this and we get a jump start on our own bio and chemical weapons expertise. And that was one of the most troubling things, because not only did we not disclose to everybody and it's all secrets, like the perpetrators of this, they never faced justice.
Yeah. We only see a sampling, like, the Nuremberg trials. But by the same token, and I think you touch on this in the book, or maybe you hint at it. I don't think you come right out and say it, but there is a great danger in trying to judge what happened in the past, like say in the post-World War II era, by modern standards, because as you rightly pointed out, the people who are living through that time, including the leaders of different countries, people in military, people in intelligence, they were convinced that they were living through an existential crisis, and it's very, very possible that they were right about that. And so there is a grave danger in sort of judging too harshly the decisions of the past by sort of modern sensibilities, and trying to sort of revisit or apply modern sensibilities, because our generation, my generation, has never lived through a conflict like World War II. So we really don't know what it would be like to do that. Would you agree that's something that maybe is an important takeaway from your book?
Absolutely. I was very slow to second guess the decision with this Unit 731 to take that information and use it to develop our own weapons. I was very slow to second guess the decisions on the ground in Europe to take so first of all, there were teams of of Western allies that were searching for anybody that had any intellectual property knowledge, or hardware, or paperwork, plans. It's like we were after that, and we were
Yeah.
scrambling to get that.
Hmm.
And the tension really arises because it turns out that the people who were of some rank, who had access to this information, who were the more important Nazis, and therefore probably the more guilty Nazis, those are the ones that ended up with something to trade. Those are the
Mm.
ones who could say, "I know how to build a supersonic rocket. I gotta get out of jail free card." Um, and it's
Mm.
perverse, but
Yeah.
as you said, I was I didn't live through it, but I do believe it was all well intended, by the people who made the deals.
Hmm.
And I found that there were really two groups of allies on the continent as the war wound down. It was one group, Alsos and other sort of scientists, and like the art treasure, what are the treasure men, or whatever that movie
Rice.
was.
Yes.
So,
Hmm.
so a group of people looking for artwork, looking for technology, looking for the people who built it, looking for the people who knew how to do it, looking for buried treasure and
Yeah.
buried documents that were plans for exotic weapons. There was one group like that, and there was another group, wholly independent of that, looking for Nazi war criminals.
Hmm.
Um, and it sometimes was a question of who got there first.
Yeah.
But sometimes, people were picked out of the war criminal pile and pulled back over here to this, like, this person's useful, this person's useful. And then, in a more troubling way, some of those people's records were scrubbed,
Yeah.
sanitized. They were brought back to the United States, and they, lived, um, lived peaceful, productive lives,
Hmm.
never punished, never faced the consequences for their Nazi behavior.
Yeah.
Werner von Braun, I mean, is
Yeah.
one of them. And some of the things we found out about Werner von Braun, I was shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. He was a hardcore Nazi. There's no question about it. But coming back to Kammler, um, why do you think, or what conclusion did you arrive at about why his death was falsified and why he was never brought to justice? That's one part of it, and then the other part of it is, how did he manage to keep his name off of so many records that would have tied him in with Himmler and these people? Because obviously he was a very key figure in the Holocaust agenda. But
Yeah,
how did he manage to keep his name off of a lot of the records so that the public didn't hear about it? Or was it just that his name was there, but that that was not made known to the public?
it's a little bit of both, Leighton. It's a little bit of both, and some of it was, at the end of the war in May of 1945. According to conventional history, and according to the German courts that later adjudicated this, Hans Kammler's trapped in Prague. He walks off into the woods and kills himself.
Mm.
And in doing our research, we were in touch with the Department of Justice, OSI, with the Wiesenthal Center, with Mossad, and we wanted to know what they had done to search for Hans Kammler. And it's like, well, he was dead. We never looked for him.
Okay.
And there's no doubt his death was faked. And we thought, our whole operating premise was that this Nazi rocket team that he was in charge of. So after the Holocaust, after he works on slave labor, which was almost as diabolical as the killing camps, the idea that you're going to, corral a bunch of people and work them to death, that was slave labor. And in the process, kill more and more Jews. He was in charge of that for the SS as well. But the rocket team that he was in charge of was housed in northern Germany on the Baltic Sea,
Hmm.
at Peenemünde, in a facility where they were making these rockets. And these were the V2 rocket in particular.
Right.
It was a
Hmm.
supersonic rocket that
Yeah.
U.S. scientists didn't think it could be built.
Hmm.
They just thought it was technologically not possible to have a liquid fueled rocket that could lift its own weight. They didn't think it was possible. But they were making them. And they were highly successful when they started to launch them into London and Southampton and later Antwerp. We wanted them. And
Yeah.
we weren't even sure what they were, but we had to have them. And the premise of the book is that he moved the rocket team from Peenemünde when the Russians were coming across. They were going to be captured, moved them to central Germany, So this is a very quick sequence of events, and I'll describe it very quickly. We call this the Kammler deal. So in
Okay.
October, these missiles, these V2 rockets, start to land in London,
Hmm.
and by November, we, the United States, sign a contract with General Electric to build a rocket to mimic this V2 rocket.
Okay.
In December of that year, Kammler's emissaries are meeting in Lisbon, which is neutral territory. At the embassy in Lisbon, his emissaries are meeting with representatives of the United States and General Electric. And we don't have the contents of that meeting, but I mean, you can figure this out. He's in charge of the rocket team. In January, as the Russians were approaching, he signs the order to move the rocket team from Peenemünde to central Germany. And then in February, there's the Yalta Conference.
Right.
And it takes him a while to figure out from the Yalta Conference that Nordhausen, where he moved the rocket team, is going to be in the Russian zone. It's like he moved them to safety, but they're in the Russian zone. So he moves
Right.
them again to southern Germany, just in the path of the U.S. Army. And that's how we got the rocket team. And
Incredible.
our theory was he did that in order to erase his Nazi past, save his own life, and deliver the rocket team. The problem with that theory is, why would he kill himself?
Yeah.
And then the final documents that we discover explain why he did it, and the fact that he didn't kill himself.
Hmm. So how does the story end up? I don't want to spoil the book for everybody, but how does Herr Kammler end up?
Well, what's clear from the documents is he did not commit suicide at the end of the war. He did not die. He surrendered to the U.S. Army. We've got one document after another that talks about Kammler being in U.S. custody well after May of 1945 into 1946. So he can't have died in 1945 because we had him in custody.
Right.
And we have him here, here, and here. And then, you know, in March of 1946, so that's fully 8 months after the end of the war, the file on Hans Kammler really just disappears. The paperwork ends. There is a request from Great Britain in his file saying we're requesting extradition of Hans Kammler, and there's a handwritten note from G2, which is our intelligence, no objection to his extradition, and then poof, it's as if he never existed.
Wow, what a story! No wonder you wanted to write this book. One of the other things about this book that really captured my interest is, of course, we always had the suspicion that the Nazis were close to developing a nuclear bomb. They certainly were ahead of the Americans and the Allies at some point in terms of rocket technology. You have described that. But the thing I was really shocked by in your book is it seems as though Kammler's team was much closer to developing a nuclear warhead or nuclear bomb than certainly I had ever suspected. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes, and I think it's exactly as you said, but it's also that the United States and the Western Allies concluded that no progress had been made on nuclear weapons or even nuclear power. And the way they concluded that, I think, is just completely indefensible. And there were two major prongs that led them to the conclusion that Germany never really made advances in nuclear weapons. And by the way, it's Otto Hahn in 1939 in Germany who discovers the basis, nuclear fission, the basis of what became nuclear weaponry and nuclear power. Right. So they were ahead of us, and they were very adept at this. But anyhow, all of these nuclear scientists, the German nuclear scientists, several of them, not all of them, are corralled and then put in a detention center in Farm Hill, New Jersey. Farm Hill in England, sorry. And they're on this campus, and there are hidden microphones everywhere. And this results in summaries of their conversations, not transcripts, but summaries that are produced by, young men who speak German and English who were working for the American Army. And the transcripts, the summaries are imperfect, as you would expect if they were written by a 22 or 24, 26-year-old guy who's just, out of college, who doesn't know anything about nuclear science and weaponry or science at all.
Right.
But from that, they conclude that the German nuclear scientists really didn't understand nuclear science and fission or fusion or weaponry. But later we find out that there was this, I don't know, ploy by the Nazi scientist called Deadliest, which was their deliberate attempt to mislead the Americans, to mislead their captors. They had agreed silently among themselves. It's like, we're not going to disclose what we were working on weapons and how far we got. So it was clear they knew they were being recorded, and they decided not to disclose that information.
That's disinformation. That properly stated.
Yeah, absolutely. No, absolutely. And so that was the first big chunk of information that we, the Americans, used to decide they had made progress. The second was a group I referred to earlier called ALSOS, which the group of scientists that followed the advancing American and Western troops as they went across the continent. And they were responsible for exploring and exploiting scientific research facilities that they were told existed. The problem with that, and you can read the ALSOS report, and we cite it several times, the organizer of that said there were far too many places for any team to really explore. And the places they were told about were based on pre-war intelligence. So that there were undoubtedly places they missed that they didn't explore. It was commonly reported by them that by the time they got to a place, it had been evacuated by the Germans. So they had taken all their stuff, all their equipment, all their notes, all their records. So they're basically looking at an empty room rather than anything useful. And or the equipment had been just destroyed by the advancing Western allies. They're fighting a war around these buildings. So, and the remarkable thing, Leighton, is that the report by ALSOS concludes definitively, and I read a gazillion World War II reports. None of them are really definitive. They always equivocate. They always say probably or perhaps or most likely. This one says they absolutely made no progress on nuclear weapons. And they wrote that report. This is the thing that stuns me. They wrote that report before they entered Germany. They hadn't even looked at facilities within Germany, and they were never able to look at facilities that were behind the Russian zone of occupation. So that's the second major chunk of information they used to conclude that Germany made no progress on weapons. So to me, it's like, I don't even, it's not credible to me.
Yeah, I can see why you use the word indefensible. I mean, it would be, to me, in hindsight, it would be, presumptively true that, the Germans had pretty good scientists. They're probably pretty close. But that's another feature of this book I really like. And, one of the things about the book that I appreciate is it reads, there's history in there, there's law in there, there's elements of public policy and things like that. But, the thread of it is it reads like a great, like a really good novel. There's sort of this Ken Follett-like story that runs through that I think really makes it highly readable. Were you conscious of that when the three of you were working on the book, that you wanted to have something that wasn't just sort of a history book, but something that was very readable that would really capture the reader's interest?
Yeah, I was acutely aware of that for a couple of reasons. Like, one, I was like, I'm a traditional history guy. It's like you write a history book as he did this and then he did this and then he did this and then he did this. When Keith Chester and Dr. Colm Lowry came to me, they had two conditions. They wanted their names on the cover of the book, and they wanted it written in first person, and to have two stories: the story of Hans Kammler and the story of us chasing him and finding him and recovering the documents and things like that. And my immediate reaction to that, which I said out loud, is like, first of all, I've worked with a couple different publishers, a couple different agents. Nobody's going to want three names on the cover of the book. Because they will say it's not going to sell. I mean, what is this? Three authors? What does that mean even? And nobody is going to publish a history book that's written in first person because nobody does that. And so we wrote the proposal. I pitched the idea. The agent never said a word. The publisher never said a word. And that's the way we wrote the book. And 2/3 of the people that come to me saying they've read the book say, I love that aspect of the story.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you wrote it as you guys were discovering things.
Yeah, it's like a quest. It's a
Yeah,
quest. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So I think that was well, bravo. That was I think in the end there was some risk there, but it really works, and it's a wonderful book. I
Well,
really enjoyed reading it. It's original. It's like nothing else that I've you could probably tell from our conversation here. I've read a lot of books in this genre on this topic. I've never read anything like this.
yeah, and I credit completely my co-authors, co-researchers, Keith Chester and Dr. Colin Lowry. They were the ones who had that vision, who could
Yeah.
see that that's the way to write this.
Well, they needed you too, because obviously you have the keen scrutinizing legal mind, where you question things and you look for evidence and you dig for documents, right?
Yeah.
You have to bring home the receipts. As lawyers, we know this, right? And
You-
so you bring all of that, which is a very important part of this, because you don't want to write a story like this that reads like a mythology. There are too many books like that about Nazis. Let's face it. So this, what you bring is, I think, what you bring here. You're being modest. A lot of what you bring to this is really, really important too, because it brings a level of persuasion and coherence to the work that it would not have otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for that. I mean, I'm very pleased with the way it worked out, and I would say the three of us were just an incredible team. The way we came together, and we reflect that and try to write about that. How one of them would be strong on this point, and I'm resisting, and the other one comes in, and they sort of team up on me. And but I felt like my reputation as a lawyer is on the line here.
Interesting.
We really have to have the goods if we're going to go talk about this and then this and talk about German nuclear weapons. It's like, and then stolen art and treasure. It's like,
well, the proof's in the pudding. This is pretty good pudding, I have to say. So I wanted to close off our conversation here by talking to people about where they can find the book. Now, obviously, it's available on Amazon. Is there also a website or some other place where they can go and they could buy the book?
They can buy it from the Regnery publisher site, and now actually Skyhorse owns the book as well. So Skyhorse Publishing is a place to buy it. Amazon, Barnes and Noble. I think you could probably still find it in a couple bookstores, but you really have to probably find it online. But what's remarkable is, it came out a few years ago in hardback, sold well enough that it had a second life when it came out in paperback. And now that the publishers have changed, they've put some promotional money behind it, and it's had this third life. So, and I should say it's available in hardback, it's available in paperback, it's available in Kindle and audiobook too. It's a good actor who read the book. I did not read the book.
Great. I love the audiobooks. I got the paperback myself. Really enjoy. I didn't know it was in hardcover. I might get the hardcover for my library. Next question is, I don't know if you've been asked this yet, but as I was reading this, I was thinking, wow, people are really fascinated by Nazis. This would be a great, if you could develop this into a screenplay, what a book.
Yeah.
Or I should say, what a movie. Has anybody talked to you about that? Is that in the works at all?
So many people who've read this have said that. It's like, this should be a Netflix, like an 8-part series.
Or better yet, a documentary.
Yeah. Well, we've had some documentarians approach us, and we haven't gone in that direction. I would love for this to become an HBO thing or a mini series or something like that. I know some people in the industry, and a lot of people that I know are saying, well, my brother does this, or my sister-in-law is one of these. And I have a friend, a good friend, James Swanson, who wrote a book called Manhunt, which was about the hunt for John Wilkes Booth after the Civil War, and that ultimately got picked by Apple Plus. So it's been.
I saw that movie. It was captivating. What a great
and
film.
it took 12 years to get that, one option after another to get it over the finish line. So I'm hopeful of that. I think it's a natural sort of fit.
Me too.
We'll see.
I hope it happens.
Make it happen.
Well, we'll do our best. Hopefully you sell some more books. So folks, we've been talking with Dean Reuter. He's one of 3 authors of a really wonderful book, original book about World War II. It's called The Hidden Nazi, The Untold Story of America's Deal with the Devil, World War II Collection. And rather than describe it, there's a short little teaser we're going to play for you right now.
Did an architect of the Holocaust escape justice?
Even worse, was America responsible for hiding him? The Hidden Nazi is the untold true story of the worst Nazi war criminal that you've never heard of. General Hans Kammler was a sidekick to SS chief Heinrich Himmler and was responsible for the construction of Hitler's slave labor sites and concentration camps. He personally altered the design of Auschwitz to increase crowding, ensuring that epidemic diseases would complement the lethal work of the gas chambers. Hitler was so pleased with his work that Kammler was put in charge of the Nazi rocket and nuclear weapons programs. So why has no one ever heard of him? Kammler was declared dead after the war, after a supposed suicide. But when my co-authors and I dug in deep, we discovered documents from the US government unseen since the 1940s. These documents held an astonishing discovery. Hans Kammler was in American custody for months after the war, for months after his reported suicide. Why? Did he secretly cooperate with Nuremberg prosecutors? Was he protected so the United States could inherit the Nazi rocket program? The Hidden Nazi is a riveting true story about a criminal mastermind and America's shocking cover-up that protected him. Buy The Hidden Nazi on Amazon or at a bookstore near you.
There it is, folks. If that doesn't get you to buy this book, I don't know what else I can do. I read it and I highly recommend it. We've been speaking with one of the three authors of that book today. His name is Dean Reuter. The other book we're going to add to our reading list is one that was edited by Dean and another person named John Yu. This book is called Liberty's Nemesis, The Unchecked Expansion of the State. This book I have not read, but I plan to read it. And the theme of it is, if there has been a unifying theme of Barack Obama's presidency, it is the inexorable growth of the administrative state. Its expansion has followed a pattern. First, expand federal powers beyond their constitutional limits. Second, delegate those powers to agencies and away from elected politicians in Congress. And third, insulate civil service from politics and accountability. And he talks about the history of this, going back all the way to Woodrow Wilson. And although on the face of it, I don't know if you'd agree with this, Dean, although on the face of it, this book would not seem to be related to your Nazi book, there are some lines of symmetry here. In terms of talking about the administrative state, because what was the Nazi state? What was Nazism but the administrative state gone completely amok? And of course, the connections that you draw between what happened with the Nazis at the close of World War II and how some of them were brought to America, they tie into some of the apparatchiks of the administrative state in America that are still with us today, and actually, frankly, have taken over Canadian politics as well. So I think this would be a very interesting book to read in conjunction with the one that you wrote on Hans Kammler. What do you think about that?
Well, so I'm always reluctant to compare the Holocaust to anything, to invoke the Holocaust as a roadmap to anything. But you're right that the study of World War II, much of what happened, it happened incrementally. All of what happened really happened incrementally, and the legal system was used in the early days to make it happen. When first there's a law passed that Jews can't get into this kind of school, and then they can't practice this kind of profession, and they can't they can't own this sort of business, and all of these steps had I noticed in studying them some sort of incremental benefits for the non-Jews. It's like, if your kid's not getting in, my kid has a better chance. If you have to sell your business at a discount rate, I can buy it. If you have to move out, I can get your house at, for pennies on the dollar. But it was all done, believe it or not, legally, technically, under the Nazi regime. So we can't invoke the Holocaust and say this guy's a Nazi or that woman's a Nazi or fascist. But you have to always be aware. It's like, never again. Let's never allow a concentration of power in that magnitude that could result in something like this.
Well, very interesting. One last question before we let you go. Obviously, very well-read, erudite man, legal scholar. Are there any books other than the one that you've written, or the one that you edited as well, that you would recommend to people listening or watching this, to help them gain a better understanding of the topics that you focus your scholarship upon?
Well, one book that documents really well the movement of German scientists en masse to the United States is Operation Paperclip by Annie
Oh,
Jacobsen.
yes. I've heard of this book.
That's a fairly recent book. It
Mm-hmm.
predates our book. It's more broad. It looks at a number of different people, but it describes this phenomenon of identifying experts in Germany who had a Nazi past, sanitizing their record, bringing them to the United States so that we could benefit from their expertise.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's quite a good book.
Mm-hmm.
I read a lot of law and policy books now. I just read a book by Alexander Karp, who's the founder of Palantir, and it's about the alignment of the tech world with the U.S. government.
Right.
And it relates back to World War II, because his observation is that we wouldn't have won the war if business didn't work in conjunction with the government. And we've sort of lost that in the technology world, that Palantir is a government contractor, and they will make big ideas and big technology ideas that are applicable for the U.S. defense and
Mm-hmm.
protection of the U.S. economy. China's got that in spades with wholly owned companies, but we're lagging behind, he says, in that regard.
Yeah,
Very
it's just interesting how intellectual property, the way it's treated, has changed. It's become something to be proprietary about and to protect. Whereas in the era following World War II and during World War II, in order to win, you had to have the sharing, and sort of that ethos has changed, hasn't it? So yeah, that sounds like a really fascinating book. Well, Dean, it's been our great pleasure and our privilege to have you on the program. Thank you so much for your book and all that you're doing, and wish you much continued success with the sales of the book and everything else that you're doing. And thanks once again for being our special guest here today on the program to talk about your work and this incredible book.
Well, thank you, Leighton. It's been great to be with you.
Thank you.